Now, I've been thinking about taking a very unsuitable motorcycle on a very long ride. Not because it makes sense, but because it feels like the right thing to do. That said, I know a lot of things could go wrong. So there are a lot of reasons why touring on something like this is generally not the sensible thing to do. One, it's a superbike. Two, it's Italian. Three, it's old. It's an old Italian superbike. And most importantly, for the last 10 years or so, this bike has been gathering dust, sitting in a warehouse, deteriorating over the years. So this bike was made in 2010, registered in that same year. So about 16 years old. It's recently been brought back together, brought back on the road, but still the issue of reliability is always going to be hovering in the background. Now, superbikes, as a rule, do not grow old gracefully. Most don't actually make it to retirement. These bikes tend to suffer sudden mechanical cardiac arrest. Engines explode, wallets weep, and repair bills quietly end two-wheel careers. Others simply meet an earlier end, usually sideways, in a brief and regrettable conversation with physics gone wrong. And the rare few that survive these two fates face something arguably worse: abandonment. Because in the superbike world, time moves differently. A new year doesn't just bring a new model, it brings a new truth. Faster, sharper, prettier. And suddenly, last year's apex predator is demoted to yesterday's flavor. The typical shelf life of a superbike is about 2 years. That's roughly how long it gets to sit at the top of the food chain, if it's lucky. After that, it quietly slips from hero to history. Sold, swapped, or stored away before disappearing into mechanical obscurity. This bike, however, has had a different kind of life. A quieter one, a better one perhaps. In hindsight, its long hibernation in a warehouse might not have been neglect at all, but preservation. A kind of mechanical retreat, a monastery of sorts, where it sat in silent meditation, untouched by the relentless march of progress. And now, reawakened and given a second chance, the question is simple: what next? Well, that's what this video is for. Now, I don't really know about you, but the idea of motorcycle touring now seems to come with a very clear template. Big, tall bikes, panniers, crash bars, bikes built and equipped to take on anything. So you don't really have to think about much once you're on the road. And I guess that makes perfect sense. But I suppose at the same time I've been wondering whether it's necessarily the right way for everyone. Must touring have to start from a fixed idea of what the right motorcycle is? And instead of trying to optimize for the perfect bike, I figure why not just stay open to what I already have in front of me. In this case, a 1000cc superbike. And here's the honest to goodness truth: taking a superbike on a road trip, it's not about making a statement. Well, maybe a small statement. But really, this feels more like a trip down memory lane. You see, I'm in my mid-50s now, and when I first started riding in my late teens, Sport bikes were the center of the motorcycle world. My first proper liter bike was an FZR 1000. I bought that in 1994 for $15,000, and I loved it in a very uncomplicated way. It was uncomfortable, it was thirsty, and it was definitely overkill for almost everything I used it for, but none of that mattered at the time. For close to 7 years, I rode it everywhere. Now, of course, the visual language of motorcycles has changed completely. Sport bikes are nowhere to be seen. Look around any place in any country where motorcyclists gather and all you will see are maxi enduros. Big wheels, tall screens, wide bars, crash guards, aluminum cases. These have now become the default motorcycle. And in this context, riding something like this F4 can feel a little out of sync with the times. Not in a nostalgic way, more like a glitch in the matrix, like it's out of place in 2026. The bike's ergonomics do not help. The F4 is cramped, properly tight. The seat is high, the pegs are high, and the bars are low. So low I can actually visualize the curvature of my spine. And then there's also the heat. It shows up quickly, rising from somewhere below you, building in intensity until it just wraps around you, enveloping you in a cloak of heat that only disappears when you step away from the bike at the end of the ride. Riding an F4 in traffic feels like an intense session of hot yoga, but without any of the wellness benefits. It's not a bike I choose for every day. It's just too focused and way too uncompromising. But every so often you ride something like this and you are quickly reminded why people still crave this kind of motorcycle. The brakes feel immediate. The suspension feels alive in a way that's almost reactive. The whole bike feels less like a Swiss Army knife and more like a precision tool, focused, narrow in purpose, and when you wind it up, it moves with a ferocity that is genuinely frightening. This bike also feels very light on its feet, and it just wants to tip into corners. It doesn't need any encouragement there at all. And once it's on its side, you naturally roll on the throttle just a little bit more to go a little faster, at which point it encourages you to lean it even further. That's when you realize you're in that virtuous loop. More lean needs more speed needs more lean, and suddenly you're leaning much lower and faster than you ever intended or thought you could. And despite its flaws, this is still a bike that will sit at 90 km/h without complaint, mostly. As you can see, it'll do it perfectly legally, perfectly calmly, but it never really feels settled. At 90, it feels like it's just waiting to be let loose. If, however, instead of letting it loose, you drop the speed down to 80, you can actually see the temperature climb a bar. I guess that's its way of lodging a silent protest. Of course, this is not unique to the F4. Most, if not all, superbikes don't run especially well at street legal speeds, even street legal highway speeds. And I guess this kind of explains why superbikes have mostly disappeared from our roads. But people still buy them. No doubt in very small numbers. And they almost never go touring on them. They're mostly tracked. Some are used for weekend blasts on B roads. And that's completely understandable. To own one of these now and use it often, you need superhuman patience or suspiciously high tolerance for pain. Ideally, both. That is, after all, the nature of the beast. Sport bikes are lovely to look at, brilliant on a racetrack, but not so enjoyable anywhere else. Least of all, a leisurely ride in the countryside, which is the kind of riding of late that I seem to enjoy. I guess I've just been thinking about this bike slightly differently. A road trip on the F4 would not be a ride, more a kind of pilgrimage. And the thing about a pilgrimage is there has to be some element of hardship in it. Otherwise, it's just a holiday, right? Also, I'll have to travel light. Basically a backpack and a tail bag. No room for creature comforts. And it looks like I'll also have to plan my fuel stops very carefully. The 17-litre tank is small in relation to the engine's thirst. And I'll be lucky to get 180 k's before the fuel light appears. On a bike like this, route planning is also important for another reason. Because I'll be aiming to avoid slower, tighter roads. None of that endless technical first gear, second gear stuff. This bike is just going to feel impatient and grumpy. The MV is happiest on faster, flowing roads. It likes corners, it wants to lean, but it prefers long sweepers rather than tight chicanes. It's a bike that needs its space, and the more room you give it, the more it comes alive. And I already have a few roads in mind. And maybe that's reason enough to justify taking this bike on a long ride. Sure, it's borderline unsuitable. Sure, there are better tools for the job. But for the last decade, this motorcycle has mostly existed as an object. Sitting in storage, sitting in workshops, sitting around waiting for parts. It's high time it got back to being a motorcycle. And maybe somewhere along the way, a little adventure will find us. An adventure without panniers or crash bars.